Well, I don't think any of us expected to see these pictures. A rescue 17 days after the collapse of that factory complex in Bangladesh. And we're going to be live in just a moment in Dhaka with a number of guests from across the city. We'll also talk about another extraordinary rescue, that of those 3 women in Ohio. Some of you are saying we can learn about America and race through the reaction to that story. So we'll discuss this. These are our contact details. You can get us on all the usual places on social media. We'll also talk about Sir Alex Ferguson at the end of the programme too.
People are going to want to know.
Let's just say something.
If you're tweeting while you watch, WHYS is our hashtag. We'll pick up all of the messages that you send us. Let me introduce you to our first few guests. Edisham Hock is joining us live from Dhaka. Edisham, share with us your reaction to this rescue today.
Yeah, actually, we were glued to on the TV from 3:30 this afternoon, and it was great watching these. Actually, we have been having lots of political rivalries there. Battles are going on. Last few days were horrible for political crisis, and then comes this news. Reshma is much more than a government worker. She is for us. She's a hope. She's a symbol, and we see this. She's a survivor, and maybe a survivor for the country. And we actually required this type of a symbol for saving our country. And we see this a huge can have a huge impact on the country, on political crisis and everything. And
so you're saying she's not just a person, she's a symbol of hope for Bangladesh, and you hope it may influence the type of politics your country has as well. Let's bring in Taskin Rahman, also live with us in Dhaka. Taskin, share with us your reaction.
Yeah, we were all very happy to see that, because she's also, I agree with the previous speaker that she's a symbol of hope. And this is a miracle that has happened, 17 days in the dark, and she was standing when she was recovered is quite a miracle. And I would say that, that this may be the turning point of, all the bad press that the Bangladesh government industry received over the past few months. I hope that, this recovery can, wash them away and show us and direct us to a new industry in Bangladesh.
Well, Edishana and Taskin, let me introduce you to Minoshi Barua from BBC Bengali. I mean, it's extraordinary, Minoshi, to hear the gentleman in Dhaka not just celebrating this rescue for this woman's sake, but for the country's sake.
That is what people are saying. They're saying that although people are calling it a miracle, a supernatural act, an act of God, but they're actually calling it a light of hope in the darkness. I have seen comments on Facebook, social media, newspapers. They're actually saying that she is a symbol of hope, as we just heard from Dhaka. The moment the news flash, there was a news flash in the afternoon, I think people actually glued onto the television screen. All the news channels were showing the rescue operation live, which lasted for 45 minutes, and the whole country is jubilant.
Well, Edishan, perhaps you can describe that for me. Tell me about that hour while the rescue was going on. How did you see people following it?
Yeah, actually, I was at my home. I was watching on TV, and I called so many of my relatives. My wife was outside, and I called them, just put on your TV and see what's going on. And actually, literally, I was weeping, and I heard many of my friends, and they're putting their comments on Facebook. They're crying, and it was so emotional. And the girl was saying, "Save me, save me." It's really something I can't express in words. It's much more than that.
And Taskin, do you think then it was a mistake maybe to send in the diggers, to send in the heavy machinery onto the site when there may have been a possibility people were surviving?
Well, I think it's a miracle that somebody lived until 17 days without proper food and water and some oxygen. But I think it was necessary for the heavy machineries to go in. I mean, how long can you wait? You have to really, what is the wait period, ideal wait period? Six 10 days, 12 days, 15 days. It's the 17th day, and I think although the heavy machineries went in, but they were quite careful in using them. Otherwise, she wouldn't have survived. And I hope that her survival doesn't disappoint many, because now the hopes have gone up very high for quite a lot of people who haven't found their near and dear ones. I hope they don't get disappointed soon.
Taskin, thank you very much. You're live with us from Dhaka. So is Edishan. Let's bring in another guest live with us who can speak to us here on BBC World News from the Bangladeshi capital. Corby, you're with us, and I understand you did some work down at the site in the first few days that followed the disaster.
Yes, from the first day we were present there. We heard the news and we ran there. Situation was not really good. There was no coordination initially. So we thought that maybe as we have some sort of training on this sort of incidents, not an expert, but we did some training. So we showed up there and we were working on the ground.
And let me bring in Manoshi from BBC Bengali again. I mean, you and our colleagues at BBC Bengali know this country better than anyone. Is it realistic to talk about this event having a political impact, or is that perhaps people getting carried away?
Basically today, people, I think they have risen above all politics, because the president, the prime minister, the leader of the opposition, they all congratulated the rescue workers. They were all relieved that at least, after 17 days, one female garment worker was rescued alive. But obviously, in Bangladesh, there is sort of politics with anything, but I don't think with this particular rescue effort there will not be any politics. I mean, people have been talking about, the opposition party has been talking about getting international help. They had blamed the government, saying that if they had received international help, they could have rescued more people alive. But today, I think they have actually risen above politics and congratulated the rescue effort.
Well, thank you very much. And those of you who are watching in Bangladesh, you're very welcome to get in touch. If you'd like to get us on the hashtag, it's WHYS. You can get us at facebook.com/world have your say as well. I'm wondering if you think there will be a long-term political impact of this rescue. And Corby, let me ask you about the pressure on the garment industry to reform. Do you think that pressure will continue in spite of this rescue?
We hope that the pressure continues, because this is not the first time that happened. We have seen Tazin garments 5 or 6 months ago, and people with time forgot. But this is, I think, this is the time where we have seen every party, as we were saying, that you're talking about the government, the opposition party, normal civilians, everyone went to help. And I think people should put the pressure. I don't know, to be honest, if it will continue, but I hope that it should. We're continuously tweeting, writing on social medias, even trying to get the words out. There have been petitions set up. And this is not only about the pressure that has to be created only inside Bangladesh, but the pressure has to be created also from abroad, from outside, from the buyers, from the consumers who are buying it. It's not a role of only people in Bangladesh or the garments worker.
And Corby, I'm guessing that while for one family this is incredible news, many families must have had their hopes raised and then dashed when they realized that Reshma was not their relative.
Yes, I remember I was watching the television and there was an interview of an army who was sharing the story that when they said that, yes, there is one person alive, I think how many hopes they have created. And when they said Reshma, there was a couple of these families who rushed. One was saying, I have it's probably my daughter. Someone said, it's probably my wife. And people rushed there, but everyone was actually disappointed because Reshma's family was somewhere else, who later meet at the CMH where she was taken.
Corby, thank you very much indeed. Let me quickly bring in Taskin again, because Taskin, you used the word miracle. Now, do you actually believe that God intervened here, or are you just using it as a turn of phrase?
Well, it's a difficult question. I mean, I would say that she was blessed with oxygen. She was blessed with water. That's how, God intervened. It wasn't something like, she was given another life when, in the same body.
And just a quick question to you, Manoshi, because some people are suggesting it's a miracle because she was found in what some people think was a prayer room, some people are saying was a room near a mosque. What can you tell us about the circumstances in which she survived?
Well, this is an extraordinary event. We were told by the Chief of the Fire Brigade Bangladesh and also the rescue team. They did a briefing and they said that Reshma survived on food from her own lunchbox, and also because she was trapped on the second floor in between concrete pillars. And when people left in panic, when the building started to collapse, they left food all over the place, and she actually survived on food scattered all over the place, and from from water which came from a burst pipe or something like that. Although she hadn't had any food in the last couple of days because all the food had perished, and when the rescuers finally reached her, she asked for drinks and some food. But I think it was her willpower, and on the social media, many people actually praised her fight for survival and her courage.
I bet they did, and it's an extraordinary achievement. Minoshri, thank you for joining us from BBC Bengali. Taskin, Corvi, live with us from Dhaka, thank you very much. Lots of you have been getting in touch from Tanzania, Algeria, Iraq, France, Nigeria and Ethiopia, all with very similar messages expressing your joy that this woman has been found. If you want to carry on talking about that rescue in Bangladesh, our Facebook page is a good place to do it. In a couple of minutes' time, we're going to talk about another extraordinary rescue, the one that happened in Cleveland at the beginning of this week.
Talking about it.
Let me say something.
Hi, I'm Ros Atkins. Welcome back to World Have Your Say live here on BBC World News. Now we're going to switch our attention to that extraordinary rescue in Cleveland, Ohio earlier in the week. 3 women who had been missing for around a decade each were found in this one relatively small clapperboard house in a suburb of Cleveland. I'm absolutely certain you've seen the story. Now, what we're going to discuss on today's programme is partly how the city has responded to it, but also whether we might be able to learn something about race and America, because some people, not all, but some are suggesting that the way Americans have responded to the man who helped with the rescue, Charles Ramsey, may have told us something about America and race. So we'll get into that in a moment. First of all, let's look at a video that Michael in Cleveland has sent us through our uploader.
I'm Michael Karutz in Cleveland. I live about 1 mile from Seymour Avenue. After the initial euphoria and celebration that accompanied the discovery of the young women, I think now things have taken a significant turn in a different direction. We're uncovering now in the investigation process the grisly details, the day-to-day facts of the young lady's existence during nearly 10 years of captivity. And I think the community is looking for a silver lining, lessons learned from the investigation process and about how that can be improved, as well as how, as a community itself, we can better come together to help prevent or reduce the chances of something like this ever happening again.
Michael, thank you very much indeed for posting that video. By the way, you can upload videos on any of the stories we discuss at worldhaveyoursay.com. Now, just one development in this story to bring you from the Reuters newswire. It's saying now that DNA tests have shown that the suspect in this case, Ariel Castro, is the father of the 6-year-old girl who was found in the house, who's the daughter of Amanda Berry, one of the women who was kept in that house. So that has been confirmed, at least on the Reuters newswire. Ariel Castro is the father of the 6-year-old who was kept in the house along with the 3 other women. Now, let's bring in our next guest. Alyssa Rosenberg is a cultural critic at Think Progress, which is a website in Washington, D.C. Alyssa, explain to our viewers whether you think we've learned something about race and America through the reaction to the rescue of these 3 women, but also the reaction to the man who helped to free them.
Well, there are a couple of racial dimensions to this case. First is the identity of the accused perpetrator, Ariel Castro, and we've seen some initial attempts to distance him from the rest of Cleveland's Puerto Rican community. Victor Perez, who's the city's chief prosecutor, has said what should be obvious, that Castro's actions don't represent Cleveland's Puerto Rican residents of Puerto Rican descent. We've also seen some discussions about the women themselves who fit into a larger narrative in America about that suggests that there is a racial disparity in the way that we pay attention to missing women. The suggestion is that young women who are white, who are upper middle class, when they go missing, there's much more attention to their disappearance, to investigations into the case, and into long-term efforts to find them.
Are you persuaded? Are you persuaded of the research that's? Are you persuaded of the research that suggests that's true? Is that something you think is happening in America?
I mean, I think it's from the patterns of media coverage. I think that's self-evident, but I think it's a class issue as well. Obviously, you know, a woman who is working in a service job, whose family has fewer financial resources, that family is going to be able to do less to keep their daughter's name in the news when she disappears. So I think there's both a race and a class component here. And then sort of the third component of this case is the identity of the men who helped free these women from their captivity in the Castro home. The first one to come to public prominence was a man named Charles Ramsey, who's African American, and who gave a sort of well-received interview to the press after he intervened in what he thought was a simple domestic violence incident that turned into be something worse. His interview has been sort of dissected, auto-tuned even. Screen grabs of the interview have become sort of, have turned into memes, and there's some suggestion, Aisha Harris, who's a colleague of mine at Slate, has written that the treatment of Ramsey's interview really sort of fell into a pattern of treating African American people who intervene in serious crime as entertaining, almost as distractions from the events in which they participated, rather than what they are, which is heroes who intervened in difficult circumstances. Well,
you mentioned that Charles Ramsey's been auto-tuned. We'll play a little bit of that in a moment, but you raised a number of points, and those of you watching, especially I suppose those of you in America, do you think we do need to look at this story and also reaction to it through the spectrum of race, or do you think that is entirely irrelevant? Let me pull up this comment from Damien in Miami. He's posted on our Facebook page. Let's have a look at it here. He says, coverage of missing white women, particularly attractive women, dominates local news for days or weeks on end. If a missing woman of colour receives any coverage, it's usually mentioned in passing. I mean, I don't know if is that comment fair, Alyssa? I mean, to be honest, this story was big before we knew anything about the appearance of these three women. We hadn't seen them for almost a decade.
Well, and I mean, one of the things that I thought was interesting about the immediate coverage in the rescue is that photos of two of the women, Amanda Berry and Janine DeJesus, circulated fairly quickly after the rescue. It was harder for mass media to get pictures of a third woman, Michelle Knight, and there was some speculation before her identity was confirmed and a photo of her was released that the reason her image wasn't circulating was because she was African American. That turned out not to be true, but it speaks to, at minimum, a deep sense of disparity about these issues.
Well, listen, let's get you talking with a couple of other guests. Aisha Harris is a writer for Slate based in New York, and Cynthia Dempsey is a lawyer in Cleveland, Ohio. I mean, Aisha, let me bring you in first. Do we need to think about race when we're looking at this story, or is it a side issue or not relevant in this case?
I think we do, in some ways, need to look at race. I think also, in the case of the three girls, or the three women now, class also plays a part in it. One of them was identified as Latina, Gina DeJesus. But the other two girls, who I also had never heard of until they were found the other day, they seem to come from lower class income. And I think part of the reason why we haven't heard about them for the past 10 years is because of the fact that they are not middle to upper class women. And that's who we usually see, the Elizabeth Smarts, the Natalie Holloway girls. They tend to come from middle class, upper class upbringings.
Cynthia, let's bring you in. World Have You Say has a long-standing connection with your city of Cleveland because we're carried on FM radio there. And when we visit, it is striking how you're in one neighbourhood and there's one group of people from one sector of society. You go a couple of blocks and it's like moving to a different state rather than a different neighbourhood. Do you think that's a factor in how this case played out over the last decade?
No, I don't think so. When the girls initially went missing, there was quite a bit of media coverage. It was covered on a regular basis. The families were tremendous in trying to distribute flyers everywhere and looking for them. It kept on for a long time. And I will tell you that flyers were distributed throughout the city, the greater Cleveland area. However, we have to remember that this was over a 10-year period, and it's very hard to sustain that over a 10-year period. I will say that the families and the extended families on their birthdays or anniversaries. They did try to hold vigils. They would contact local media. So I don't know that I quite agree that there was not the same coverage as, say, Natalie Holloway. Yes, of course, that was a very, very popular story. And remember, you had media types like Nancy Grace who just seized on it and used it for their own, commercial interests to keep publicizing it. But I would say there was in the city, there was, over the 10-year period, a repeated return to this story.
So there was an interest, but let me just jump in there and read you a comment that we've received from Dwight. Now, Dwight listens to World Have Your Say's radio edition on FM on a station called WCPN, and he posted this on our Facebook page. People of Cleveland are closed, often depressed and angry. Many are paranoid. I walk my dog in a 2-mile radius for 7 years now. It's amazing how few people I know on that city block. And Aisha, I wonder if this is a broader comment about how communities now exist in America.
I've never been to Cleveland. I can't necessarily speak to the way he feels about that area. I do know that there are certain parts, I live in New York, there are certain parts of Brooklyn that I would not necessarily want to go to at certain times of the day. But as far as I know, there's always been places like that. And there can be some disparities in terms of race. You may see more people of color in those areas. But I do think that there is some disparity between the some communities. I can't speak to Cleveland, but I do know that there are parts of America where that is very true.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, Brittany Lewis has just joined us, a blogger, senior music editor of entertainment website Global Grind, also in New York, as Aisha is. Brittany, let's talk about the man at the centre of this story, really, Charles Ramsey. He heard the calls for help. He went to help and did a fantastic job by all accounts, but he's become an internet sensation. Some people are saying that this is less about celebrating what he did and more about laughing at how he spoke.
I would say it's a combination of both. I was speaking with some of my coworkers and I was like, Charles Ramsey is basically the antithesis of what most Americans believe an American hero looks like, especially, since the beginning of modern day media, we have been fed and given these images of what it is to be an American hero. And quite honestly, they don't look like Charles Ramsey. Now, that's not to say that African-American men or people who look like Charles Ramsey aren't heroes. It's just that that's not portrayed in the media. So for people to, initially see him, I think people were both shocked. And then he has a very bubbly personality and he's colorful and he's vibrant and he kind of is just, one of those people that their charisma is infectious. So I think it's a combination of both. I do think people were very shocked at the way he looked, but I also do think that people appreciated that he had, saved these young women and Amanda Berry's daughter from a terrible situation that they have been in for an entire decade.
And I'm interested to hear Aisha and Alyssa respond to the points that you've made. Just wait a moment, though, because we've got to take a quick break here on World Have Your Say. Those of you watching, you're also very, very welcome. Do you think the comments that Brittany has made about Charles Ramsey are fair? Let us know on the hashtag WHYS. We'll be back in a couple of minutes' time. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. Now, I'm pretty sure you'll have seen Charles Ramsey this week. He's the neighbour who helped rescue those 3 women who were being held captive in Cleveland. He became an internet sensation within a couple of hours of giving some enthusiastic interviews on television. But what is now being discussed is whether his popularity and the amount of attention he was getting was because of what he did, the rescue he was involved in, or whether actually people were just laughing at him. And it highlighted some issues to do with race in America that perhaps not everyone wants to talk about. We'll get into that in the next 20 minutes.
Talking about it.
My experience.
People are going to want to know.
Let's just say something.
lot when people give an interview which becomes very, very popular on the internet, it gets auto-tuned, and that's what happened to Charles Ramsey within a day or two of this interview he gave. Let's have a look at a little of this.
Something was wrong when a little pretty white girl ran to a black man's arms. They give away. They give away. My neighbor got big because we see this dude every day. We eat ribs with this dude, but we didn't have a clue that that girl was in that house.
So we still have Aisha with us in New York. Brittany's also in New York, and Alyssa's live from Washington, D.C. Aisha, lead us off on this. Normally auto-tunes are just funny, but are you laughing at this one?
Not really. I can understand why people could find the original interview funny. He's a very engaging storyteller, and if you're not used to hearing or being around people like that, you could find it funny and kind of different. But the auto-tune, to me, kind of takes away from what he actually did and turns him into a mere source of entertainment and glosses over the fact that he does bring up race in a very astute and sharp way and just kind of distills it and makes it kind of meaningless.
Alyssa?
Well, and I think this is a case where memes serve a larger function, right? I mean, part of the reason that we want some sort of relief, some sort of humor in this situation is because it's awful. And what Charles Ramsey is talking about is awful. He lived next door to a house where women were imprisoned, where they were, impregnated, where they suffered forced miscarriages. He's a distraction. And I mean, I think that serves an understandable human need. That doesn't make it attractive. And I certainly think that there is a racial component to the reason that this particular meme took off. There was another neighbor involved in the rescue of these women, Angel Cordero, who speaks primarily Spanish, who didn't give an interview in the immediate aftermath of the rescue, who didn't have the same sort of very specific details that Ramsey brought up. And he hasn't gotten nearly as much attention. And I thought what Brittany said about the extent to which Charles Ramsey doesn't look like conceptions of an American hero is important. He's not wearing a uniform. He, maybe hadn't done his hair for the day. He's talking about something very human, eating McDonald's, eating ribs. There are these specific human, messy details that make Ramsey compelling and interesting, but that let us look at him rather than the situation that he intervened in, and that is what's genuinely important. I mean, I think there's an intersection of both race and a fairly natural need for relief in a situation like this.
Brittany, I can see you reacting to Alyssa as she talks.
I agree. I think Charles Ramsey is definitely a distraction from the real story. And like she said, a lot of people, look for that comic relief or look for something to smile about when really you just want to weep. And I feel like that's kind of, why he's been kind of played into this whole character and turned into auto-tune and memes and T-shirts. And, McDonald's is telling them they're going to be in contact with him. I think it's like a bigger distraction from the actual issue here. And that, 3 women, had their lives stolen from them for so long. And I think that people don't really want to hear those gritty details right now. So they're focusing their attention on somebody who's obviously really charismatic and colorful. And, I think, America has dealt with a lot of anguish over the past few months, especially with the Boston bombings and a lot of things that have gone on in this nation. And, I just feel like they're looking for Charles Ramsey to kind of save the day as far as, providing some kind of comic relief.
And what about the comment, and Aisha, you alluded to this without actually saying it, what about his comment that he knew something was wrong when a pretty white girl ran towards a black guy? I mean, he said it as a joke, but quite a few people online are saying that actually it was an astute observation.
I mean, I think it very much is, and he says it as a joke. But to me, when I first saw the interview, I also kind of laughed in a similar way and feeling like, wow, I can't believe he just said this on TV. It felt kind of like a Richard Pryor or David Chappelle punchline, where you laugh for a minute, but then you step back and you think, oh, well, he actually has a point. And that's my problem with the meme and the memification of it, is that it ignores it glosses over this very real reality that we do have this kind of underlying, sometimes very blatant fear of the Black man and the Black man as a hero and the Black man in relation to a white girl or a white woman. It's just very clear that that's still there, and I think he made a very good point with that.
Well, all three of you, let me read you a comment that I've just had in from a viewer in Zimbabwe. Connie, hi Connie, thank you very much for watching. Thanks for sending this in. She says, this kind of scenario wouldn't happen in Africa. We're more neighbourly. Everybody minds everybody else's business. It's a real shame it's not like that in America. Alyssa, do you think that's fair comment, or is it just unrealistic to expect in big cities everyone to know what's going on in your street?
I think that ignores the reality of the situation, which is that Ariel Castro was very much embedded in the social framework of his community. He barbecued with his neighbors. He invited them to salsa concerts. He, he was a school bus driver, a job he was fired from. He gave local children rides on his motorcycle. I think the idea that the social fabric in America is somehow gravely impaired and that people just didn't see what Ariel Castro was doing are ignoring significant other issues, including the fact that, neighbors say that they called the police repeatedly after seeing naked women on leashes in the backyard, that they saw, a child standing at a window in the attic. There are larger structural issues about, police responsiveness and resources here that, I think the idea that that people just weren't paying attention somehow is very odd. That said, I think that Ramsey himself raises interesting issues of culpability for all of us, right? His neighbor, someone he knew socially, turned out to be keeping women chained in his basement. Ramsey was willing to intervene in what he thought was a domestic violence situation. So I don't think this is a story about the social fabric of America so much as it is about,
No, that's interesting because Aisha made a similar point. Alyssa, thank you very much indeed. And Connie, if you're still watching, you're very welcome to let us know what you think of Alyssa's response. Now, here's another message to pull up. Terry listens to World Have Your Say on WCPN radio in Cleveland. She emailed our program during the week. All this buzz about Charles Ramsey seems superfluous to me. Is it really about race, or are we just making it that way? He's funny and he knows it. Let him be a character. What about that point, Brittany, that perhaps people like you who say it is an issue of race in some cases need to just let this go and enjoy a guy who's got a funny turn of phrase and happens to have ended up in the news?
I'm really kind of torn. The issue of race obviously, comes up, with, Charles Ramsey, saying his comment about a pretty little white girl running into a Black man's arms. But it's also just, in general, the media, in the United States sometimes picks, and not even just Black people, but honestly, like probably some of the most uneducated people or people who really are just really interesting characters in general to talk to, on the news. I've seen, white people on the news who I'm like, Jesus Christ, like, what is everybody saying? So I think it's like a race issue, but I also think that a lot of people haven't been bringing up, I think it's a class issue. If Charles Ramsey, looked like Will Smith and spoke like Will Smith, this wouldn't be an issue.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting, Brittany. Let's get you talking with Aisha and another guest who's just joined us about where class stops and where race starts. We've said goodbye to Alyssa. Thank you very much to her for her contributions. Now let's bring in Charlton McElwain, who's a professor of media, culture and communication at New York University, and he joins us from the city. In fact, I think all three of you are now in New York, so we've got a full house. Charlton, thanks for your time. Do we need to look at race? Do we need to look at class? Or are neither relevant to how we consume this story?
Well, I think they're both certainly relevant, and they're so closely intertwined, especially here in the United States. And I think what you have here with Charles Ramsey is really one of these instances where the medium gets in the way of the message. That is, our need and drive for entertainment, for laughter, for comedy, really glosses over what was a really poignant and profound message that Charles Ramsey had, and that message was much about race. And so I have no problem really enjoying the moment, enjoying the comic relief, the levity that was introduced by Ramsey's particular way of telling this story. But the fact that he brought up race in this way spoke to the fact that this kind of racial imbalance is so ingrained for people like Charles Ramsey, for people like myself, in the fabric of American life, that it's something you can almost do nothing else but laugh about. And so I think the real problem here is that rather than saying, okay, let's consider the message, this race message, this class message, let's simply turn it into pure entertainment, and that's where the majority of the country runs with it.
Jonathan, thanks for that. Aisha and Brittany, I'll get to you in just a second, but I've got another comment to throw into the mix on this discussion. Rob's in Florida. He's posting at facebook.com/world have your say. This is more an issue of class than one of race. That's echoing what Brittany was saying. There is a class of people who aren't used to straight talk or embarrassed by anything that brings attention to common people. I mean, Aisha, is that what it is, that we were shining a spotlight on a type of American who normally doesn't get an outing in the mainstream media?
Well, I think that class is definitely an issue as well. But to look to, I mean, if you go to YouTube, you will find any number of witnesses. Most of them tend to be seemingly underclass or low class, lower class, or undereducated, and of all ethnicities, white, black, Latino, it doesn't matter. However, the ones who seem to get the most widespread attention and kind of the ubiquitous appearances in commercials and other viral videos are people of color. We don't usually see the white lower class person getting a lot of attention. We don't see Beyonce quoting them. She quoted Sweet Brown, another viral video that went instantly viral last year. So I think there is this kind of perhaps unconscious, persistent desire to see, in particular, Black people perform, and Black people of a certain class, which is lower class.
Charlton?
Yeah, I think that's really right. I mean, in the United States, I think a very long history that says we like our Black people one of two ways. One is at arm's length because we fear them and think of them primarily in terms of violence and criminality. The other is that we like to laugh at them. And so when they're close, when we see them as someone who are someone that's friendly with us, we like to do that in a joking manner. And so if we're not doing one of those two things, we really don't know what to do with it. And so when Charles Ramsey brings up this issue of race, we kind of have that moment where it's like, oh no, what do I do with that? Let's go to laughing, because I understand that. I understand Black men in this context as performers, someone you joke with, someone you laugh at, but I do not look at them as someone who is fundamentally making a educated, serious point, and that is whether they are of any particular class structure. I don't like Dave Chappelle when he makes issues about race and politics as much as I don't like Charles Ramsey, who are in two different income brackets, when they make a serious point about race as well.
We've got one other person to bring into our conversation. Nanjala Nyabola is a Kenyan writer and graduate at Harvard Law School. She joins us live from Boston. What are your thoughts on these issues? Hi there.
Hi there. I'm inclined to agree with a lot of the points that have been made, especially the point about there being a class issue interwoven in this. And I think we have to remember that in the United States, race is used as a proxy for a lot of other complicated issues, in part because race and class overlap so strongly here. And I think there's an element of almost theft in the sense of people taking poor people's stories and turning them into entertainment here that needs to be acknowledged. And I really like that the other commentators have brought in Dave Chappelle and Richard Pryor, because I think these are comedians who have made their career on laughing at uncomfortable, or making light, or not even making light of, but drawing laughter into complicated situations. And I think Dave Chappelle in particular, if you watch interviews where he talked about why he stopped doing his comedy, it was precisely for the same reasons why I think that we need to be to have a serious thought about why we're laughing at Charles Ramsey, because Chappelle was concerned that people were not laughing with him, they were laughing at him, and that he was playing this minstrel role, which is not what he wanted his comedy to embrace. And so when people...
And those issues that, no, I was going to say, and those issues you're raising have been brought up in a couple of tweets from people who are watching and tweeting at the same time. The hashtag WHYS. Sabrina in Brazil says, the way Ramsey's being mocked and exposed on social media should make potential good Samaritans think twice. It's shameful. And Paul is in Kampala in Uganda saying, Charles Ramsey's a hero who didn't get the proper reception someone like him should have. That's sad. But Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, I got the impression that while a lot of people laughed and enjoyed his turns of phrase and his way of storytelling, they didn't forget about the fact that he was brave enough to go and kick in a door and save these 3 women. That hasn't been lost, has it?
No, I don't think so. Especially that he did the Anderson Cooper interview, which he was a lot more toned down, still very vibrant, but you kind of saw like a little more serious side of Charles Ramsey. And I think that's really when it kicked in for everybody. Like, listen, this man really did. He risked his life. He had no idea what was behind those doors, and and that he's literally breaking into his neighbor's house. And I think it kind of put it all into perspective for everybody, especially with that Anderson Cooper interview. That Charles Ramsey did something that he didn't have to do. We all sometimes we have a moral obligation, but sometimes people think about, how does this affect me? Am I putting myself in danger? And I think him kind of, telling the story in a more relaxed and more calm manner really, put it in perspective for people that this man did, in fact, risk his life, and he did save these 3 women. And the fact that he, contemplated about if he would have known this, he would have, done it a year ago when he first moved into the neighborhood.
Well, Brittany, let's see if our viewers in Brazil
plays a part on his character and shows that he's really a good guy.
Let's invite our viewers in Kampala and in Brazil who are questioning whether that's happened to respond to you. WHOS is the hashtag. Great to have you on the programme, Brittany, Charlton and Nanjala. Thanks also to Aisha and Alyssa. After a short break here on BBC World News, we're going to talk about a certain man who resigned this week. He goes in Manchester quite a lot. I wonder if you can think who I'm talking about.
No, I actually talking about it. Let me say something.
Well, we couldn't end this week's World Have Your Say. We're talking about Sir Alex Ferguson. His resignation from Manchester United brought on a massive outpouring of comments and tributes on social media. Let's just have a look at the scale of what happened. Just in the first hour, 1.4 million story mentions, many using the hashtag Thank You Sir Alex. There was another one, hashtag SAF, which a lot of people were using. A number of people bringing attention to the fact that more tweets were on Sir Alex Ferguson than in the hour after Margaret Thatcher died. Number one global trend within 8 minutes, and the countries tweeting the most were the UK, US, Indonesia, Malaysia and Spain. Make of that what you will. Let's bring in a couple of colleagues to talk about this. We've got Daniel Gallas from BBC Brazil and Puria Jafara from BBC Persian. There they are, out in the world's newsroom. Nice to see you, chaps. How have your audiences been reacting to Sir Alex's departure?
Well, Sir Alex, it's strange for us to talk, I think, about Sir Alex's departure, in Brazil at least, because the Brazilian public, they don't have too much of an intimacy with Sir Alex, I'd say. They know him, but the fact that he never managed any of the big Brazilian names, he never, stirred any controversies in Brazil, he was never big, powerful brand in Brazil. I think people are not too intimate, but of course they're familiar with his legacy, and they love that fiery stuff he has, and I think how ruthlessly he is into his team and the club. I think many Brazilian fans are more about the club than the national team, and I think Ferguson is sort of the manager that stirs that into them. I don't know how he's seen in Iran.
Yeah, but I think in Middle East, because we don't have that many good players like Brazil have, and Alex Ferguson started something. It was Alex Ferguson, Eric Cantona and Peter Schmeichel. Like, these were the new superstars of the new generation of football, like in the 90s. And I think what has happened, like what we know as Champions League today, has got Ferguson has made the most contribution to that because of that 99 final. And like after all those years, the British teams they didn't manage to get any trophies in Europe in the Champions League. And then it happened in that dramatic fashion against Bayern Munich, like with all those games in the group stages against Barcelona, against Bayern Munich, and it was David Beckham, Paul Scholes, like all these players he brought in, and I think Ferguson always will be as a legend. Like people in Iran, they remember Manchester United of the 60s, Dennis Law, Georgie Best, and Sir Bobby Charlton. But Ferguson just brought something for the new generation.
But do you think that there is, from all these 26 years, you mentioned the 1999 team, do you remember any other teams? Do you think any other teams inspired? Because I think in Brazil, I don't see many Brazilian fans remembering Manchester United. They'll tell you about Barcelona, they'll tell you about Real Madrid, they'll tell you about all these teams, but I'm not too sure, maybe that 99 final because of the dramatic fashion.
Yeah, but I think going back to what you said earlier, it's mostly because you didn't have that many big Brazilian stars in Manchester United, and one of the maybe if Ronaldinho joined Manchester United from Paris Saint-Germain instead of going to Barcelona, things would have been different. But there are like so many like British players, like international players. Ruud van Nistelrooy played there. Cristiano Ronaldo played there. Ryan Giggs, he's been around for all these years. Like there's so many stars like people can connect to, which Ferguson was like a big part of having them in the club and like kind of integrating them into the team.
Poria, Daniel, I'm going to jump in just because we're quite tight on time. Very good to hear from you. I love the idea of Alex Ferguson being a legend in Iran. I guess when he was growing up in Glasgow, he didn't see that one coming. Here's a video that's been posted through worldhaveyoursay.com from an editor at The Spectator who's not so impressed with Sir Alex Ferguson.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about Alex Ferguson's achievements, and perhaps rightly. I think that the darker side of Sir Alex Ferguson is being ignored at the moment. I think that Sir Alex Ferguson and Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United had quite a malign effect on Premiership football. I think that when we talk about bullying the ref in the Premier League, every team now does it, but it was Manchester United who really pioneered the art form. I think that Alex Ferguson specialised in never criticising his players, even when they were behaving disgracefully. I think he criticised refs tactically and often to the effect of improving his results. I think also that he was ungracious towards teams that beat him. I remember against Bayern Munich last year, he said that the worst team had won, even though his side really were comprehensively beaten. So I think he's been a damaging force in British football. And I think while we're praising his achievements, we should remember that.
There's Freddie Gray. I think we can safely say he won't be on Sir Alex's Christmas card list. Thank you to him for uploading that video at worldhaveyoursay.com. Remember, any time of the week, not just when we're on air, if you've got something you want to contribute to BBC World News, upload a video at worldhaveyoursay.com. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Let's just say something.